what we were just reading is from Parshat Vayera, and I'm just going to sum up what we read because we're picking up basically, I think like the verse after what we read. No, maybe like the last aliyah now that I'm looking at it. But basically, at the beginning of the parsha, Avraham sees three men walking out in the wilderness, and he goes and greets them and brings them into his tent, and he feeds them, and then we pick up here. So if I can get a volunteer to read the English, and basically what we're going to do is we've got this huge chunk of Torah, and then I've got some questions and some commentaries on it, and we can kind of put all that in perspective once we've gotten through the text. So if I've got a volunteer to read the verses from Torah.
Okay, so we're starting with Genesis chapter 18, verse 10. Then one said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah shall have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind her. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having her periods. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I've lost the ability, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Then Adonai said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for Adonai? I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. Came the reply, you did laugh. The agents set out from there and looked down toward Sodom, Abraham walking with them to see them off. Now Adonai had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have, turn page here. I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of Adonai by doing what is just and right, in order that Adonai may bring about for Abraham what has been promised him. Then Adonai said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, that their sin so grave. I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. The agents went on from there to Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before Adonai.
Great, thank you, Marshall. So this text kind of acts as our bridge from the angels at the beginning to then the story of Sodom and Amorah. And so I'm just curious, what strikes you about this text as we're reading through this section in particular? Yeah, go ahead, Marshall.
Well, one thing that strikes me is that they're translating the word anashim as agents. So these are in effect agents of God.
Mm-hmm. So translation
as opposed to some undisclosed people.
Yeah, so that's kind of coming from Midrash and from other commentaries, but it's not the simple translation of the word. Great. Right. Yes. Anyone else? Yeah, Joey?
What's right to me is that Sarah blatantly lied about laughing.
Sarah blatantly lied about laughing, yes.
It's obvious there was around her that she was lying about it, but she denied it. It was obvious.
So she denied it even though it was obvious that she was doing it?
Right.
Great.
Like, think they were born yesterday or something?
I don't know. Interesting thought. I'm curious in particular, how does the story transition from the first story we were talking about the men who come to visit Abraham, to the story of Sodom and Amorah? I'll rephrase the question. Does it transition? Not so well? So it transitions from saying the bridge is God speaking to God's self, saying, "Shall I hide what I'm about to do?" But it kind of comes out of left field. At least that was my first reading of the text. Is there's not really a great transition from the first to the other. Like, if I turned in a text that transitioned this way as an assignment, I would not get an A on that assignment. So that's sort of the framing that I wanted to get through, so that we can look now at 3 different commentaries that I think they're not directly speaking to, or they're not intentionally directly speaking to why this transition happens the way it does or doesn't happen the way it does. But I think that they get at connections between the first story and the second story that may be that can help us understand why these 2 stories are at least put together, even if it's in a kind of awkward concert, if you will. So the first text we have is from Rashi. Can I get a volunteer to read that text?
What am I doing in Sodom? What am I doing in Sodom? It is not proper for me to do this thing without his knowledge. I gave him this land, and these 5 cities therefore are his, as it is said. And the territory of the Canaanites was from Sidon, and thou goest towards Sodom and Gomorrah, etc. I called him Abraham, the father of a multitude of nations. Should I destroy the children without informing the Father who loves me?
Great. So Rashi here is pulling from the Midrash, but that's like the last part here. But what is he essentially saying is why it is that at least he's answering the question more so, what am I doing? Like, why is God even saying that, I think? So what's he saying?
I thought you were asking the question.
I am asking a question.
Yeah, I think God considers Abraham his partner now.
God considers Abraham his partner, and so the end of that would be,
Yeah, he doesn't want to do something that impacts the relationship, like wiping out 2 cities.
okay. So God doesn't want to wipe out 2 cities without telling Abraham who's his partner in the world. Okay. Other thoughts? How would this text sort of speak to both the first story and the second story at the same time?
Is Rashi not saying that essentially this whole area is Abraham's now, and God's going to go destroy part of it? And how can he do that without involving just telling Abraham?
So this land is now part of Abraham's land,
Right.
and God doesn't feel like God can do something in that land without telling Abraham. I'm not going to go into my neighbor's yard to pick up a ball necessarily without at least saying, hey, knocking on the door,
But
saying, hey, I'm going to go.
You're not going to go into your neighbor's yard and cut down his tree without.
Better. I'm not going to go into my neighbor's yard and cut down the tree and use the wood without asking if I can do that first. Okay. And even more to the point, I think, of what you're saying, he hasn't just told Abraham, this is your land. He's told Abraham, you're about to have kids. This is going to be their land and their onward through the generations. I'm not going to do something that's going to affect this land through the generations without letting you know first. Great. So we have this general idea of, because Abraham is going to be the start of a nation in this land, God doesn't want to do anything there. That's what our bridge is between these 2 stories. God doesn't want to do anything in that land without letting Abraham know. That's Rashi's quasi-bridge between these 2 stories. Great.
It's interesting because Rashi is actually rewriting the text.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say Asher Ani Oseh Bisdom. It just says And then Rashi is actually translating it to be what I'm going to do in Sodom. But that's not, I just was trying to read the text multiple times to see if I don't actually think that's what it's saying. I think just in general, God is, I mean, if we're reading it in the context of the story, then of course, like we hear about Sodom right before and therefore after it might be implied. But I think Rashi is reading into it to then make his own commentary. Because it just says, like, I think so much what Irv was saying, like it just says I shouldn't hide anything from Abraham from what I'm gonna do. In general, period. Not necessarily about Sodom. And so it's interesting that Rashi then reads into that it must be that God is talking about only not hiding that which God would do by way of Sodom, which I think is probably not the case.
Great.
Probably more general than that.
Rabbi Schatz is looking at the Hebrew.
Yeah.
It says Asher Ani Oseh.
Right.
Right.
So is that with, like in modern Hebrew, that would mean what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here it's translated in probably the biblical with the
What I'm doing.
what I'm going
Yeah,
to do, what
right,
I'm
right,
doing. So,
Right.
so I guess my question about that is how that canon should be read.
Right. So if you read the verse out of context, just that one verse in the Torah, Adonai Amar Hamchatzeh Ani Me Abraham Asher Ani Oseh. And God said this mask, literally, like this hiding that I'm going to do from Abraham, should I do it?
Right.
So that's why I was saying, like, it's Rashi really reading in Rashi's giving it drops, just like every rabbi does.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Right,
Rashi's
right.
reading into it what Rashi wants to read into it.
Great.
And, like,
So just for the people on Zoom and for podcast and whatever, because we've had a long lull without the microphone. So what we were discussing was the fact that Rashi's reading in the fact that this is what God is going to do or doing in Sodom. It doesn't say that directly in the text. It's contextual clues could certainly point us in that direction, but it's not the exact text. It just says, should I let Abraham know what I'm going to do, period, or what I'm doing.
But I think tense matters here in
Yeah,
that
totally.
translation.
Totally.
Because if there is no actual connection system, if it's just that Abraham and Hashem are now in partnership, that's a completely different understanding
Totally.
of the text.
Yeah.
Well, and we're gonna not to give away what Beth's about to do, but the next commentary is gonna have it in a different text, right? So it's
Yeah.
clear that Rashi is reading into it differently.
It's all
Yeah.
dikduk.
Yeah, so the grammar here really matters.
But yes.
So I don't want to get stuck in the weeds on one text because I want to look at this in context of some other commentaries. So the next commentary we have is from Or HaChaim, and can I get a volunteer to read this?
First of all, this is a good volume for everybody? Okay. And God had said, should I conceal God had said, should I conceal from Abraham what I'm about to do? God chose the word hamechased deliberately. Abraham noted that the third angel had a mission which had so far not been revealed to him in contrast the missions of the other two angels which had become manifest to him already. One had come to heal him and the other to tell Sarah about her impending motherhood. Moreover, when the angels departed from him, Abraham noticed that two of them walked in the direction of Sodom. Abraham accompanied these two angels to see them off. He realized that these angels still had a mission to perform on earth, something which had been concealed from him. Abraham would become aware of those angels' mission after the event. God was concerned lest he would feel badly in retrospect if he would not know how to take him into his confidence. Our sages state that the reason God decided to take Abraham into his confidence was because Abraham entertained doubts about the justice of God having brought on the deluge. He found it impossible to believe that there had not been at least 10 or 20 righteous people at that time. In his opinion, God should have suspended judgment on their account. The words Asher Ani Oseh, right, then mean as I am used to do. I do not destroy a nation unless there are no righteous people left.
Great. So how does Or Chaim understand this text, or why it is that God's saying, should I conceal from Abraham what I'm about to do? Yeah, or
Yeah, I mean, we just made Abraham like, you know, the person who's going to be the founder of the Jewish people, you know, coming after a long search procedure. He doesn't want to go through having to do that again.
Good search committee.
So God has gone through his search committee and doesn't want to have to convene a new one after Abraham finds out that he was set up for a job that was impossible, or like that Abraham was going to be undermined.
Like his employer decided to go to another.
Okay. So God's worried about what Abraham's going to do if Abraham finds out after the fact as opposed to beforehand. Okay.
I mean, it seems from the beginning of this text that the concealment is what that third angel was sent to do. If that seems to be kind of the main focus for the Or HaChaim in terms of what does conceal and reveal mean here, because he goes into so much detail in terms of what the two did versus what the one does. But then it seems to kind of by the end that there's, again, we go back to this Asher Ani Yoseh, right? That it seems to be that this concealment is why have I done what I have done to get you to where you're going to go? Like why have I done what I've done in the past to get you to what I think your future would be?
Great. So if I understand correctly, there's two parts to this. I want to make sure I'm following what you're saying.
I think that's what I'm saying. I don't know that I'm right, but I think that's what I'm
So,
saying. Yeah.
so,
But he leaves the third angel hanging.
so,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like, he never actually tells us what the third angel's mission is.
So Or HaChaim is saying, just to,
Sorry, I'm
no,
upset with him right now.
no, great. That feel free to be upset with the commentary. But so the first half of this commentary is saying we already know what assuming that these three men were angels, which is already going into a lot of interpretation, but it's an accepted interpretation. Then angels have missions, and two of these angels have already fulfilled their mission. One of them healed Abraham after Avram's Brit Milah, and the second one told Sarah that Sarah's about to become a mother. And this third angel was just there. Like, angels don't do that. Angels have missions. So the third angel must have had some mission. And I think you're right that he doesn't directly say what this mission is, but he hints at the fact that if the angel is walking off towards Sodom, the angel must have something to do with this. Right, which is really confusing that he mentions two of them walking off to Sodom, which is the text, but one of those angels theoretically has already fulfilled their mission. It doesn't quite add up. The math doesn't quite work unless you understand angels as being able to either have multiple missions or that maybe one of the angels didn't actually complete a mission as he says. But he's at least saying that the bridge between the two of these texts is that the angels were there at the beginning, and the angels didn't complete. One of the angels, at the very least, did not complete their mission and has to go to Sodom, be involved with Sodom somehow to complete that mission. And then the second part of this, which is a little bit only complicates things further, is the fact that he's looking at this text and saying, why is this written the way it is? And it must be that Asher Ani Yoseh, that I am doing is like how it would normally be, or like the simplest way of reading it. But it can also mean something that I'm used to doing habitually. And so God is saying, I'm not used to habitually destroying whole groups of people unless there's absolutely no saving grace within them. So I need to let Avram know that like I'm about to do this. And then we get the story of Abraham going back and forth with God and saying, are there really no righteous people there? So that Abraham can really understand, okay, this isn't just happening on a whim. This is a truly wicked group of people. They have no saving grace, and God isn't going back on the covenant with Noah.
But the Or HaChaim also
Yeah, so, right, so that's what he's getting at, is Orach Chaim is saying, I made a covenant with humanity after the flood that I wasn't going to destroy all of humanity again, which Orach Chaim is saying is a covenant to not destroy, to not, if you will, throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm going to make sure that whatever goodness is still left in the world is kept alive. Like any saving grace is enough to save everyone. And so what he's saying is that's the callback to Noach, is back then I saved the good and got rid of everything else, but this time around there's no good to be saved. So I'm going to destroy everything again, and I don't want Abraham to think that I'm going back on that covenant with Noah.
I'm more concerned about the concept that Abraham doesn't really trust God. Doesn't trust God yet, right? According by what Orach Chaim is bringing out. And keep in mind, right? This is just one parsha after Lech Lecha, am I right?
Yeah.
So Abraham just like left everything he knew to, be the first monotheist, trusting God, and God's not really quite sure that he's earning Abraham's trust, it sounds to me, from this interpretation.
Right. So Orach Chaim is saying there is certainly a sense in this understanding that God, this reading would understand God is not thinking that Abraham trusts God. But that reading can also work with what happens at the end of the story with, because the Parsha ends with the Akedah, which we understand as being a test of Abraham's faith. So there is what to stand on in saying that God may not trust, that Abraham trusts God.
It's a classic case of a difficult partnership that you have to deal with, right? There's points of communication, partner, explaining what you're doing. Because when you do something that's out of the ordinary, wiping out a piece of the city, that's different than just a trespass.
Well,
It's not like you're dealing with a person, you're just, you're taking a big chunk of territory and dropping the A-bomb on.
There's a lot of trust.
Whole parsha has a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, even Lech Lecha, right? Like I think this is what I spoke about in the sanctuary this morning. I think there's a lot of what we find in Lech Lecha to be like what you would find in a relationship that's just beginning, right? The kind of let you go to bring you back. What does it mean for what does it mean for me to be able to give you space so that you can have your growth, right? That's what God is basically doing. It's saying, Abraham, you need to get out of these places that you're really safe and feel very comfortable in, and you need to now grow in these other places so that you can become this great nation. And then all of these things happen to kind of test that relationship, right? And I think we get to a point with the Akedah where it's like how much of this testing is actually going too far, right? At what point does that testing then stop, and then they can just be in a relationship or not, right? Does the test go too far for them to be able to resolve that relationship?
Great. So we had I want to summarize and then move on to the next text. So in Lech Lecha, we have God saying to Abraham, you need to get out of your comfort zone in order to be able to grow. And then we have all these tests that are quasi opportunities for growth, quasi maybe going a little bit too far, especially as the Parsha moves on. So I want to move on to this last text, and I really only want to focus, because for the sake of time, on the part where it goes in the Hebrew from Bet, Leman Hevi Hashem V'Gomer, which is in the Hebrew, the number, or in the English, in the number 2. So this is Datzei Kenim's understanding of the concealment factor. Can I get a volunteer to read just from number 2 on? Because it's really just so you know, it's really just him kind of saying the same thing in number 1, but a lot shorter. It's on the last page.
Okay.
Yeah,
The very last page, appropriately?
Unless.
Okay,
unless. On the last page, it's like the third or last sentence.
Okay. Unless his descendants were to practice justice and righteousness, they would not inherit that land.
Great. So this is an understanding of why it is that God is speaking to Abraham. Thoughts? How does it sit with you?
Well, this, to me, Lech Lecha, which I learned last year here, actually, is transformative. Because not just is it testing Abraham, but to me, Lech Lecha was a pilgrimage where people went and explained, this is the religion, join us. He formed the Jewish nation there, you know, coming from a long march that was transformative from the organization I worked for, the farm workers. Because a march, what a march does is all of a sudden people are coming and they've never seen that before, so they're coming with like forcing the mind to be open. So that then resonates with the last sentence. I'm creating now a people. It's like the most important pasha since the Passover sequence where we liberated ourselves. So that's my point of why.
So it's important because Lech Lecha was the forming of a nation, and
And he's saying here that you're going to need to take care of the Sodom and Gomorrahs, homelessness, all the problems we face, you know, present day Sodom.
Yeah, but you
So-
can't say that because if you're equating Sodom and Gomorrah with homelessness and all the problems
I
today,
withdraw
God
my
destroyed
withdraw my
them.
comment.
God destroyed
We'll
it. We
argue
didn't
it
want to.
we'll argue it on the way home.
Okay, we can argue about
okay, other thoughts? Joey?
About just verse number 2, which I just read, I think this shows you that sometimes inheritance can have strings attached.
Inheritance can have strings attached.
Good.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Oh yes, because you only get if you're good, kind of thing.
You only get if you're good. So
So if you do the right things, and such as what it says here, if you don't, because to contradict what it says, if they don't practice justice and righteousness, then they don't, in my view, they don't deserve to inherit the land.
great. Sandra?
That's how it brings it back to why Hashem has to tell Abraham. Because it would appear otherwise that Hashem is being unjust. And Abraham and his descendants, the Jewish people, to follow justice and righteousness, need that example, need to have a just and righteous God. And so that, to me, would bring it back to why he has to have a conversation with Abraham. And I think actually more than just a conversation and not hiding from him, not hide his reasoning from him. Also have that kind of back and forth, that whole argument that he has with Abraham over how many righteous people would require him to save the city.
Great. So this is Hashem saying to Abraham, essentially, I know what I'm doing is just, but from the outside, it's not going to look that way. And I need you to understand why this is just. And we'll have a back and forth on this and make sure that we both feel comfortable that this is just. But ultimately, because you're going to be my spokesperson in the world for justice and righteousness, you need to understand why this is just. Is that
Yes and no. Yes, but also, you have to understand that I am just. And so that's where I think that the whole argument between Abraham and Hashem comes into play, because it's about how we define justice.
okay?
How we define
So also that Abraham needs to understand not just that this action is just, but that God is a just being.
correct. But it's not like a parent saying, I'm doing this for your own good. It's about working together as partners to bring justice into the world. But yes, it wouldn't be destroying a city does not appear to be just. Sodom and Gomorrah, like
Yeah.
what you said with the homeless, like dropping an A-bomb on the homeless people, that's not okay.
Yeah, so they need to, if they're going to be partners, if Avram and God are going to be partners in creation, they need to be on the same page about what justice is.
Correct.
And so God needs to bring Abraham onto that same page. Great. So I just want to, yeah, one last comment.
Just so interested in the Hebrew in the last line there. Although you shall read Mishpat U'Saka. Fascinated by the word shomrim there.
Yeah.
I would have thought it should have said, though you osim Mishpat U'Saka. They would not do. And here the translation reflects the word osim, practice, right? But I think by using the word shomrim here, it indicates that underlying any kind of society, which Abraham is about to establish, you have to have mishpat u'tzedakah. You have to have justice and righteousness present.
Great. So you need to have justice and righteousness present in any society in order for it to actually be able to continue itself on. And so, and you need to protect that. And so that's really where this bridge then comes in from the first to the second. You're going to be the father of nations. You're going to have a son who is going to carry on your line, and you're going to inherit this land, and your descendants will inherit this land. And they need to make sure that when they inherit this land, that they're doing justice and righteousness in this land. Because otherwise, according to Datsekenim, this won't be their land anymore. Because look at what happens to lands that don't do justice and righteousness. Great.